Hey, welcome everybody. So this is a little special guest spot. Datastar it's just started its podcast, but uh, I did the worst thing you could possibly do and start getting arguing with someone over the internet. So there's a situation where we people have started linking to me. JLarky was talking, our guest today was talking about Datastar, and he said it was like live view, and I said it wasn't, and he said it's like a spa, and it's not, and he said you need a special server, and you don't. So instead of just having an internet arguing session, it felt like it was a really good time to like get people on board. There's something that we really want to foster in the Datastar world is arguing, but having technical arguments instead of vibe based arguments. So if there's something that's technically not correct in Datastar, I want to know about it, and I think everyone does too. So tell us a little bit about your background for people that don't know you and don't know you from your trolling ways on the internet. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for inviting me. This is kind of like a new big thing, depending on how new people are to it, or how big this thing is going to be, right? But I'm kind of like curious about like everything happening, and yeah, Datastar got my attention kind of like a while back. So for me, most of my career, I've been paid to do kind of like a full stack, kind of like development. I've been working with like Erlang and Elixir. I did a bit of Go kind of like before and after that. One of my projects that kind of like some people know me about is I implemented React Server components in Go. So I'm living in this like crazy, in this crazy intersection of like where I'm like arguing in DMs with both like Ryan Florence, who's like our author of Remix, and Jose Valim, who's like author of Elixir. It's like, well, actually, he didn't say this, he said that, and all that stuff. So this is like a this is a very common thing for me to pick one small thing and say, well, you're doing it wrong. You're like, this is not the term to use and all that stuff. So that's how we that's how we got into this mess this time.
So you're a professional JS framework troll. Got it.
Well, I'm not limited to JS. Like,
Oh yeah,
why are you
you have a
why are
good
you
point.
putting me?
No, you have a good point. Well, I will tell you that Datastar, I don't know if any other framework can say this as much, but we absolutely hate the fact that we exist. Like, we wish we didn't exist. We wish it was just built into the browser. I think a lot of things that HTMX is doing, especially around the TripTech proposals, are amazing because they want to slowly die off. And I kind of want the same for Datastar over the long period of like, if there was a couple of things around ASTs built into the browser, into the JS runtime, and things around Datastar attributes being a little more powerful, yeah, Datastar wouldn't exist either. So it's funny you're talking to authors that wish that they didn't exist.
Right. Well, I think most of the kind of like the arguments, and you're not the only like people who say that, right? Like they're like, um, and it's different from like different. How do you say it? There are many different industries, many different libraries that share that kind of like vision, right? And they could be seeing kind of like something completely different, kind of like in the end, right? But they will say something like that. So it's
I
a
have never met a React developer that wishes there was less React in their application. So maybe we're just on the other side of the spectrum then from that.
yeah, yeah. I think again, like my position being kind of like in the middle of like everything, and it's like when like React people talk about live view, or when live view people talk about React, I'm like, well, you probably don't know what you're talking about, right? Something this I can't be kind of like proficient in everything, right? So like for example, like I never like uh, wrote anything in live view, right? But I did I did a thing like in 2012 that was like based on Erlang and had like a very similar kind of like architecture and all that stuff, right? And it's like, well, those guys when they were doing live view, they I think they didn't know about that project, right? But like I know I know the architecture, I know the server driven kind of like thing, and how you can do it over WebSockets and all that stuff. So it's I'm very open to the possibility that I'm being wrong, but I'm also very open to learning about other things, which I think a lot of people like by default are not. So they will say stuff like, "Hey, this library is bad because like it's bad." Like, have you tried it? No, I just I just heard that it's bad, right? Like in
Yeah.
our circles, like all of my homies hate it, so like I hate it too, right? So like I'm trying to be kind of like not like that, right? And even for the things that I kind of like hate, like PHP and Vue, and it's like I've written PHP, I've written Vue, right? Like if I have to do it, like I will do it. So it's like I can, if I like disagree with something, it's not because I heard that like it's a bad thing. It's because I tried to do something with it and like I didn't like the experience, or like I didn't see the like the point, or like whatever, right?
Well, and I
And
think that there's real value in that because I mean, my career in the web dev, even though I don't consider myself a web developer, you always end up doing something in a browser, right? Like that's always the situation. Even if you're doing back end, you have to learn the front end. And my career is older than CSS, so um, like I've been doing it for quite a while. And yeah, I do think that there's a lot of things that are very vibe based in this world, which is weird because we're engineers, and yet a lot of it's based off vibes. I will say that I have strong opinions about Live View because I've actually ported it to Go and I know it very well. I've done like military grade stuff with WebSockets, and I have strong opinions there. So I totally agree that you should know tools before you talk badly about them. The only one that I have not used that I think is really interesting is Marco. That's the one of all the different frameworks that I'm like, man, they got some really smart ideas there. And Ryan Carnino, and all those like really smart people over there doing that. So that's one of the few ones where I was like, I'm already going down this journey, but Marco has some interesting ideas if you're going to go that route. And I'm surprised it's not more popular. Again, it's a popularity thing, not a like the tools are very strong.
right. Well, so now let's go into like the. So I think my biggest kind of like complaint, like in one sentence about the Datastar, is that like the marketing is based on kind of like keywords, and those keywords don't have like a very specific meaning, and just like if you like those keywords, you're like, oh, that's like I like it, right? Like if you don't like those keywords, it's like, oh, I'm not going to look into that. It's just like not my set of keywords, right?
Okay, so what are the keywords that you think we have, and how do those match up with what you've said on the internet?
Right. So the first keyword is uh, uh, like it's based on the standards we want to disappear, right? Well, let's look at the kind of like the standards part, right? So the claim to fame, right? The like the name of the game, whatever the like the term is, right? Is data dash like something, right?
Data dash star attributes. Yes.
So it's like Datastar is standard because it's using like a data attributes because they're always valid,
Hmm.
right? And the thing is, if you actually want to be a standard, you don't want to do that.
No, what I'm saying, the thing is that Datastar is using the standards, and the only thing is that there's needs to be better ways of hooking into that data set that gets generated on an element. But so Datastar, the engine, I think over time doesn't have to exist, but the plugins 100% exist, if that makes sense.
Well, okay, so let me start here. So you have two keywords that are like, if you go into details, they actually contradict each other. So one keyword is like, we are like 100% like spec compliant, and the other is like, we want to disappear.
Yeah, the
And
thing
I
is,
think those are in
if
conflict.
those aren't in conflict because we are using the spec as is today to build plugins and an engine that can pull out the key components of the key, because a data set is just a key and a value that are both strings, right? Like that's what data star is. It's a guaranteed DOM string map that's on an element. So we are using the spec, and we're just saying that if there was tooling built in that could extract out the data that we do in JavaScript land, if it was actually built into the C++ layer, most of this work of Datastar's engine would just go away. You wouldn't have to do that. Like
Right.
we're
So
having to pull the data out of that.
okay, so let's do like a short, like you're like in front of the standards. Like, how are you going to standardize the Datastar?
I'm not worried about that as much right now of like where the standards are going. Cause again, like I think that the TripTech stuff is a much, like that one is solid and ready to go, right? Cause they're trying to do much less. They're not trying to build a plugin, like a unified plugin standard for things. So I
Right.
want to see that go through before I even say, okay, here's the standards I want in place. I'm saying over the long period of time, enough things happen in the browser and enough things are going on that I could see us going away. It's not a goal of mine right now because we can live within the spec that's already there, still be spec compliant, and exist as is today. But I want over a long enough time for that kind of tooling to just be there. That's all.
Right.
Like
And
we are
and
spec compliant, and we're gonna. That's the most important part.
right. And I'm saying that like those two things are part of the marketing, and those two things are in conflict because like.
I just disagree that they're in conflict. I'm using the spec to say
Okay,
that you could write this more declaratively. That's it.
how would you make a Datastar a standard?
So the part of Datastar that I wish was standard is if there was things where you could have declarative reactive expressions, if that was part of the standard, so that you could actually have reactive expressions inside of just like when you do on click and all that stuff, you get basically hooked into a JS endpoint. But if that was a reactive expression where you could have signals and it actually returned implicitly, it was an expression, not just a function. I think that would solve a ton of issues directly.
Can you say that out loud? Like, what do you mean?
So, for example, when you say
If
inside of
on
when you
click.
say on click and you say console.log
Uh-huh.
foo, right?
Right.
That is running a function. But if you just said foo inside of an on click, that's not returning a string. That's not doing anything with that string. It's not an actual expression.
Okay, I'm still confused. So I have a div. I'm saying on click equals foo.
What I'm saying is inside of a string, inside of a on click, that thing that inside of the onClick is a function call. Like
Right.
that's what's happening is a function call. It doesn't return anything. You can't do anything with the results of that. You can't, it doesn't live anywhere. You can't do anything with that. Whereas if that did exist where you could make it an expression and say that the results of this live inside of the data set or inside of something that we have access to, if it was a reactive expression, a lot of the things that Datastar has to do to make that happen go away.
Okay. So you have like an attribute, and you want this attribute to have like a value based on the string inside, but like not that string literally.
Yeah, because like just like you get on click, it's calling a function. If it was an expression, and especially if you had signals built into the standard, which it looks like it's going to happen sometime in the next 10 years, um, then these things slowly go away. What I'm saying is, over time, the ideas of Datastar slowly get smaller and smaller because all we're doing is we're enabling you to use the spec. Like it dissolves away over time if that gets more powerful. There's things that are once you get signals in place, like Datastar gets 2K smaller just out of the box, right? And the same thing can happen with the reactivity that happens inside. If you could get reactive expressions inside of attributes, then you win. We already have function calls inside of attributes that already exists. If it was a reactive expression, now a lot of the things that Datastar has to do goes away.
Okay. Again, there's like a bit of a problem of like the standards don't like to do that. Standards don't like to have like multiple ways of doing the same thing, right? And it's like, hey, I want to write JavaScript, but I don't want to use a script tag. I want to write it inside of an attribute, and they're like, well, we'll just have a script tag. Like we probably like don't see the point of doing that. You're like, well, it's more declarative, and they're like, yeah, just use the framework that will do declarative stuff for you,
I
and
will disagree
use
because
like
onClick
smaller
has
stuff.
existed before anything else did. OnClick is already a function call in an attribute. That's been there since the very beginning. It's been there forever. I just disagree with you. Like it's okay, but you're saying that I'm not spec compliant and they disagree with each other, but they don't. I'm using the spec and saying if the spec got more powerful and instead of just calling it a function call, it was an expression, that changes things. It's a superset of what you can do today. It's not changing. On click could be an expression that puts something somewhere.
Okay, so my problem is that you're saying that and I'm probing you deeper, and it's like, how would you actually do that? And you're like, well, I'm not going to think about it for 10 years, right? So it's like,
No, I'm
it's
saying
a
that that's
part of
not
the
the.
marketing, but it's not like a like, kind of like an
I
actually
don't think
thing.
anyone is actively. I don't see any. Like I say it for myself. Of like, I hope that the values of Datastar go away. But there's nothing in our documentation. Nowhere you've seen anywhere that says we're trying to like dissolve away. Like I want that. That's my goal. But that's not anywhere in the documentation. So I don't know where you're getting that. That's what we're asking for. We're
Are we
not.
considering Are we considering memes as a part of documentation?
But where? Okay. So what meme said we're hope we dissolve away? Where is
Are we
that?
considering what you just said like 15 minutes ago as a part of documentation or not?
that's not part of any website or any Twitter feed or anything like that. You asked my opinion, and I think it does go away over time. I think just like all the things that were in CoffeeScript back in the day, basically made it into ES6. Like these ideas are thought of in the framework land, but all these things are things that should exist in JavaScript. They are things that should exist in hypermedia. So yes, over a long enough period, like these are powerful things that allow you to do much more in a much more declarative way. I think that's a value to the browser community.
Right. Okay. I w- uh, I will just say it out loud so that like I can finish my thought. I feel like you're not going to uh, to hear what I'm saying, but I'm just going to say it anyway. So the way that I feel like the part of the marketing that is like, hey, we want to disappear, we want to be kind of like part of the browser is that I'm not seeing it happening for kind of like two reasons. So one is like a bigger one. So it's like Datastar is how kind of like small the footprint of it is. It's still doing kind of like too much for like a standard to pick it up. So like standards are only like the joke that I have is that like why promise became a standard but like the observables didn't, because like promises are two callbacks but the observables are three, so it's like that's the cutoff. If you have more than two functions, that's like that you're not going to be part of the standard. So the second part is that uh, like just in terms of like again the namesake, the data attributes, right? The data attributes, like their whole thing is that like they don't have any semantic, they don't have any like kind of like functionality assigned to them that browser does, right? So like if you are trying to be a part of the standard, the hx dash kind of like get attribute is actually better because it is an attribute that is going to be meaningful, that is going to do something, and it can't be named data dash something. So it's like it's just the conflict of like being spec compliant right now and being kind of like a part of the spec later. Like those two things are in conflict, and like I understand why HTMX did what they did, right? And I understand like why you did what you did, but it's under the same kind of like, again, under the same thinking of like, oh, we want to be kind of like we want to be built in the browser, but like you're just like taking it in a different direction, right?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, HTMX is not spec compliant. So, like, yeah, they have to add their stuff to be spec compliant because they aren't. So, we are already like the way we teach it, the way we show it. Like, you can make HX or data dash HX dash get, right? You can make it fit within that, but it's not how anything's taught or how any of the tooling works or anything. So, um, to me, the most important part, and we'll be clear, is that we stay within the specs so that any validator from any backend, from any tooling, from any government agency, it's spec compliant HTML. That is the number one important thing. And if what I am saying is that the core engine of what makes Datastar, hopefully over time will get smaller and smaller because most of the things that make it special are already in the browser. That's it. Like the signal stuff, it will make it quite a bit smaller. If there's any kind of AST expansion stuff that happened in the runtime of the browser, it would get smaller, right? Over time, I don't see Datastar, the engine, getting any bigger than it is right now. It does everything it needs to do to get the attributes out and do what it needs to do. My hope is that the stuff that I've had to vendor in and stuff like that will slowly go away. That's it.
Right. So I think the next scandalous one is have you heard that like HTMX is written in JavaScript, right? Like have you heard that Datastar is written in JavaScript? So it's like
Yes.
because it's like a funny position, right? When you're writing kind of like server driven kind of like libraries, right? And it's like, well, you're doing all of this so that you don't have to write JavaScript, but someone has to write it, right? So
Right.
it has to be um, it has to be there. And like the argument that we were having about this was it's it's again, like frameworks, kind of like JavaScript frameworks, kind of like go up and down. They have like the cycle, and we are now in the cycle where JavaScript frameworks care for progressive enhancement for some reason, right? So if you're looking at the progressive enhancement story, right? Like if I'm using Remix or SvelteKit or like that kind of like generation of frameworks, right? I can turn off JavaScript and like the application is still going to be usable. It's not going to be great, but it's still going to be usable, right? And it's funny that it's funny how much JavaScript you need to make this work, right? And it makes sense that like with given the sensibilities of backend first kind of like frameworks, that's like they don't like to write JavaScript, so they don't want to take over that part, right? So the closest thing that HTMX has for it is like HX Boost, right? So it's like kind of like write your application kind of like driven by forms, and then like try to boost them if you're lucky. It might work, right? And you with Datastar, you're saying like, well, we don't care about that, right? Like we are backend kind of like driven application. How do you say it? Like we hate JavaScript. We don't want to touch JavaScript. But if you don't have JavaScript, like nothing works, right?
Well, so the way I look at it, and this just comes from, I've been doing it a long time, that if you are saying no JavaScript is on the page, and the thing is, hypermedia scripting is part of hypermedia. Like that is part of it. It's part of the whole idea of it is that you have these ability to have client side interactions and stuff that are driven by scripts. Like that's part of hypermedia. So if you say I'm gonna say it, I don't allow part of hypermedia to exist. Okay, cool. Then I would say then you're making a different application. So I'm of the opinion that if you're doing that, that is a different kind of application from the ground up than it is to say I'm going to have an interactive, reactive, stateful system. So in that case, you're making it basically equivalent of a static site, roughly, right? Then build that site in your backend in a way. I don't believe kind of like when it comes to the zombie or not zombie, sorry, the CSS Zen garden. I don't believe that you can build an application and make it so that CSS can change the entire look and feel of the page. Like the layout and the CSS all go together. So if you're going to build a native app, build a native app. Don't use React Native. Like actually build a native app if you want that kind of low level stuff. I'm a game developer by trade. Like you want a native app, make it with a native app. If you want a static site that has forms and links, do that. But that is different than in applications like a dashboard or an interactive site or something that you're doing for bookings or like real-time interactions with each other. Like those are different applications, and just accept that those are different. And if you're, again, this is still backend driven. Like if you're building an MPA with just links and forms, then that's still backend driven. You just don't need Datastar in that case, but you don't need anything else either. You just build it like a regular backend. There's nothing
Right.
special there.
Yeah, so I think where it kind of like clashes with the marketing again, right? Is the kind of like you can build anything with Datastar, right? And it's like, well, I can build this like Remix or like SvelteKit form, right? Way easier in Remix or SvelteKit than if I were to try to build it in Datastar.
Why?
Because for the type of application that they want to support, right? Like that's the
You
thing.
mean like a static site with links and forms? I don't need SvelteKit to do that. I can use like HTML and like up in Go or any other like there's nothing. Svelte doesn't get me anything in that case.
Well, it does, right? Like it progressively enhances it so that it can turn into SPA if you have JavaScript.
I think that you have a fundamentally different idea of what state is in those situations. I just disagree with you that like your state is different between a progressive enhancement. Like if you're trying to progressively enhance, you're doing the lowest common denominator of everything.
Right.
Like that is just a different application than what you would build if you're saying, hey, I'm going to build a real time chat application where I can book things down to the millisecond, or I can have a bidding app. You can't do that and do progressive enhancement. They're fundamentally they're like diametrically opposed. You cannot do both.
Right, and that's why the marketing hits kind of like wrong, where you're like, oh, you can do anything with that Datastar, right?
I
Well,
don't
I
know if
can't
I say you
do.
can do. I say anything that you can do in React, you can do with that. But again, I don't think React is progressively enhanced. You're just getting rid of React. That's not the same thing at all.
Um, okay, so let's imagine like I don't know, like Svelte kid blog, right? You can go to that blog with or without JavaScript, and you will get two different experiences. You will get like the base kind of like one, right? And you will get the progressively enhanced one with like link prefetching, kind of like SPA navigation and all that stuff. So how would it, like, there is a more clear way for me how to get there with HTMX than with Datastar. Does that make sense as
No,
as a
because
question?
it's a subset. It doesn't get you any farther. You're just using less HTMX. That's what you're doing. You're just using less of it. So if Datastar can go to 0, like you don't have to use it on every page. If you have something that's links and forms, you don't need HTMX and you don't need Datastar and you
Okay,
don't need React. You don't need any of these things. If you're like the baseline, if your baseline is like no JavaScript, that should be your baseline. And that is a different application than if you're building up. I just think that you're making it's like a basic website, right? And then you have like a modern like interactive application.
yeah,
You
but
want to have this gradient between these two, and I think
I can
that's a
have both.
silly thing. That's costing you extra as opposed to just doing like having it do this version and having a different version of your template that does all the extra stuff. Like
Right.
that is easier in my head.
Yeah, but I can do both. That's the point, right? It's like
You're not doing both though. You're not.
why not? Like we were doing this for like almost 5 years now, right? And it's like why are you telling me that the thing that we were doing for 5 years like doesn't exist?
Because it's not giving you any extra value. Like you're making it more complicated. For no, I don't think there's any value there. There's value in having this thing that has no JavaScript. If that is a business line level issue, great. It like, but it's also like saying I need to have light mode and dark mode and all this stuff. Like you're adding more stuff, but is that actually getting things out better? Like sometimes people just want to have the latest. Like it's more of a vibe based thing and saying, do I need to have light mode and dark mode? Maybe not. Do I need to have zombie or I use this thing called zombie Zen. That's why I keep saying that. But like the Zen Garden CSS thing, like to support something like the CSS Zen Garden, where you can change CSS and change your whole application, that takes more work than just building the CSS
Right.
for your application. I think you're doing the same thing. You just don't realize it. That progressive enhancement is costing you more than doing it where you build something that has no JS or you have something that has JS.
Right. And that's my whole argument, right? Is like if you want to do features like that, you have to have more JavaScript, right? If you want to okay.
I disagree. Why do you need more JavaScript to have less JavaScript on the page? How does that make sense to me?
I think the problem is that like you probably just like don't understand what I'm talking about, and I don't know how to say it so that you can
Okay, explain this to me. You have a site that has no JavaScript.
right.
You have a backend written in any language that sends down something with forms and links.
Okay.
Done. Cool. Then you have someone ask for a page that does allow JavaScript. You
Okay.
send down something that uses JavaScript.
Right.
You don't need more JavaScript to do that.
Right.
That's it. There's no other steps. Like if it's
Yeah,
something
but
that
I'm not talking about that, right? Like I'm talking about the different thing that
what thing are you talking about then? Because that's what you said. Progressive enhancement. You need more JavaScript, and I said no, you don't. You either don't have JavaScript on the page or you do.
So I'm talking about like the modern like frameworks that have been kind of like out for like a kind of like remix, Velkit, that kind of like generation, right? Solid Start, so on, right? So that generation of frameworks, what they do is that they have they have this thing that you're talking about. They have like a way of saying like JavaScript equals no, right? Like, and on that page, it will just like not output any JavaScript at all. So like that's not what I'm talking about. So I'm talking about like they built into their framework more code so that they can support this use case. The use case is that the like form, for example, that you're using, it will work if you have JavaScript enabled or disabled, like on the client side, or like it didn't load or whatever, right? So like it's not turning it off on the server, right? Like I'm on the server, I'm saying, oh, like don't send JavaScript for this page. It's it's going to send it, right? But like if the client didn't get that JavaScript, like the application still works.
Yeah, you
But
could
if
build it that way in Datastar too. You can send something down that uses Datastar to hook up, because Datastar supports forms and stuff. Normally we don't do it that way, but it does support it. So if you just have forms and links, the forms and links are going to work. Like there's nothing special about, you don't have to add more things to the page to make that happen. I just think that that's not correct. The reason why you have to do that is because they have to basically work around the fact that they are doing a bunch of extra stuff in the front end usually. Like the normal way is to have a bunch more JavaScript on the front end, and they have to work around the fact that they aren't doing that anymore. In Datastar's way, there's no extra stuff happening in the front end. It's just not happening. It doesn't exist. So you don't have to turn it off.
right, so I think it's just like kind of like a question of sensibilities. Like what do people value? What do people kind of like care about and all that stuff, right? And it's like for some reason, this kind of like generation of frameworks, what they care about is like SPAs that can be kind of like downgraded to MPA, like if user doesn't have JavaScript, right? Like, and that's just the goal that they kind of like set out
Well,
and
I
they
know. I think I
implement.
know why that is, though. I
Okay.
really do. Is the thing is that in a normal SPA, you're sending down so much JavaScript and you're sending down so much JSON and you're sending down so much stuff that you need a way to speed it up and to do it faster because you're sending down so much. Like this Datastar is smaller than most JWTs. It is smaller than most cookies that get sent down in these frameworks. Like it is so much smaller that you don't have to do that extra step of trying to speed things up because it's already faster than anything else out there.
Right, and this is like the next thing that unfortunately like we don't have screen sharing, so it's kind of like hard to talk about it. But um, the I think that argument kind of like works better for Remix, right? Because like they have to send React, they have to send Remix router, and
Yeah.
all that stuff. That's like a lot of JavaScript. But if we're talking about like SvelteKit, for example, like they didn't have to do it. Or like their JavaScript payload is like pretty small, so they can afford not to do it, but they do it for like this is just their sensibility. They care about that.
Yeah, I guess my sensibility is if you don't want JavaScript, don't do it. And if you do, then embrace the hypermedia, embrace the whole thing of hypermedia. Like that's what I think is important because if you want to do real interactive, if you're doing documents, like if you're just doing a documentation page that's static, then yeah, you don't need JavaScript to do that, right? Like that is just a non-needed thing. But if all of a sudden you're like, hey, I want fuzzy search and I want all these other things and I want to react to who's available right now, like most real applications as you go through are going to want JavaScript. They're going to want more interactivity. They're going to want to engage people more. So I think that you should just embrace that. And I don't care what the sensibilities of frameworks are right now because that's a dime a dozen. That happens like there's trends. And I'm going to stuff that I know that's worked for the last 25 years. I don't care what the trend is in frameworks. I'm not a JavaScript framework developer. Like I'm not a framework guy. I just made the tools that I needed to like get my backend work done. Right. Like
Yeah.
I'm not a framework developer. In fact, that's someday, hopefully, I will not write any more plugins and I'm using everybody else's plugins for Datastar, right? Like that's the hope is that I'm not going to conferences as the Datastar guy. I really hope that's not what happens.
Right. So, but this is again like from the perspective of the like the kind of like the modern SPA frameworks. They're like, oh, we actually have like a better MPA story in our land than whatever this like server first kind of like application does, right? So like if I care about that, like I can easily do that in like Svelte, for example, right, with the same kind of like bundle size than if I would try to do it with Datastar.
Okay, I'll put a claim out there that I'm happy to back it up. I will make a like MPA story around forms and links, and I will eat your lunch as a TypeScript developer against my. You pick your backend TypeScript, and I'll pick my backend, and go and like we'll see who makes an MPA story that can handle more people and be more efficient and faster and do like millisecond level update or microsecond level updates. Like, I don't believe you. I like, it may be a thing of like, it's easier than it has been for them in the past to have a story there, but they cannot beat just someone that's built an MPA to be an MPA. Like, this can't. It cannot beat that.
Right, but they don't build the MPA, right? They build this hybrid, and like
Again, your lowest common denominator in that case. You cannot build both things and be efficient. Like, that's like saying I'm going to use an FPS engine to build a real-time strategy game. It's not going to happen. The problem is the problem. I just disagree. Like, I will build a better thing by doing it correctly for that situation than it is to try to make it work for all situations, which is what they're trying to do. They have to go to the lowest. They have to. They cannot
well,
pull off the
exactly, yeah.
tricks.
And HTMX, for example, did go with that, right? Like they have HX Boost, which you can like with that one attribute, you can get like SPA and MPA story, kind of like hybrid out
But
of.
it's a lie. Like, you're now the thing is, the problem is HX Boost. Even the maintainers like Alex, I know pretty well, who's one of the main maintainers nowadays. He hates HX Boost. He thinks we both think it's the dumbest thing ever because it's lying to you and trying to make it feel like an SPA, but it's not an SPA. And now you're messing with history. Well, what happens when you start doing stuff where you're polling quickly? Now you've completely destroyed your history. Like, it doesn't make any sense. You're going against hyper. HX Boost is anti hypermedia. It just is.
Can
It's
you?
anti-rest too. It's
I'm
anti-Helios. It is. It's going against, like, the whole idea of rest is representable state transfer. HX Boost is saying that this URL is the same thing, even though it's not. It represents something different completely. HX Boost completely destroys rest. It doesn't make sense using HX Boost.
I still don't understand, right? So
Right?
so let's start there. So like I have like a blog, and there's like a just like a header with like 5 links, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm clicking on about page, and I'm going to get like let's say I use two attributes, right? Like I use HX Boost and I use like a view transition, right?
Okay, before you even get there, you're going to a different resource. You have a link to a resource, right? Like an article. That is a different place. That is a different representational state. That is part of the URL, is where you're going and what you're interacting with. That's what the link means.
Okay. Can I finish my question?
Sure, but you got to start there before you got into. You're talking about how you do it, not why you do it. And I think you have to make sure you understand the why before you get into the how. The how doesn't really matter if the why is what you're trying to do is click on a link to another article, right?
Okay, so I'm on the home page. I want to go to about page, right?
Okay.
In modern frameworks and HTMX with HX Boost, I can click on the about link. I can get client-side navigation there with some animations or whatever until like view transitions are, like MPA view transitions are in the browsers, right? That's the kind of like the best option that you have. I can click there. It will load the about page. It will update the history. It will update the title. It will update the content, right? So like this is the thing that a lot of kind of like modern frameworks, right? And HTMX with HX Post, which is not a framework, it's a library of peace. So, right, like I can do that. Why would I want to do that? Why would I want to do like SPA navigation instead of MPA navigation? Like, why would I send whatever the amount of kilobytes like HTMX takes, right? Just to make this interaction like slightly different? Well, because that's modern sensibilities, right? Like a lot of people, when they see the tab icon spinning, they just freak out and close it, right? Like, well, to make those people happy, like if they to make them think that there are no MPAs in the world anymore, we can use HTMX with HX Boost, right? And when you say that HX Boost is like a completely like a bad idea, I kind of like don't understand what you mean.
So, for example, without using HTMX, without using Datastar, even though Datastar makes it easier, you can go to your home page and add speculation rules to say load the about page. So when they go to the home page, it automatically is load the other. So when you click on it, it's literally instant. It's already in the cache. You don't need HX Boost. You don't need HTMX. You don't need Datastar to do that. Use the browser at what it's good at. You're adding extra features that already exist. You're adding more layers that don't need to exist. I just like you're making it harder when it already exists. Like you're working against yourself. The browser is so fast and you're slowing it down with these extra layers that don't need to exist.
Okay, quick example, right? Like I have a kind of like a music player that is like playing the audio right now, right? And if I click on the link and it's in PA navigation, that player is going to be destroyed. The new ones has to be created. Like it has to like skip to the same position and all that stuff, right? Like
Mhm.
that's also code that you have to do. That's also like a thing that you like. If you have that use case, you have to support that. If you have like HX Boost, you get it for free, right? So like it's all trade-offs. It's all it's all like you get one thing but you lose the other.
Yeah, but if you do it in the Datastar way, that would be an SSE event, and you could do all the thing. In fact, it supports idiomorph out of the box, which HTMX doesn't support, and it should because it's a better idea. So you can actually get all the focus events and all the move before and all that stuff you get out of the box with Datastar, which ironically is using Carson's stuff, right? Like it's better because it does all these things out of the box. So like anything you can do in HTMX, you can do in Datastar. The only thing is, I think you shouldn't do history stuff. But guess what? It's plugin based. So if you want to write a whole history push state like crazy replace thing, you could. You could rewrite. You could write HX Boost in Datastar today. In fact, I know because when I first started Datastar, it was just turning HTMX into plugins. That's literally all it was originally. And I ported everything over. Like this is a bad idea, and I started working on the SSE stuff. But the thing is, I know for a fact because I did it. I don't know if I committed it, but HX Boost was done in Datastar. It's a plugin. You can write all these things as plugins if you chose to, but I think it's a really bad idea and it goes against hypermedia, which again, Datastar, the library, does not care. It is not hypermedia focused, right? Like it's just like you can use Datastar attributes. That's really all it's there for. But Datastar, the framework, is very hypermedia focused because I think that's the best way to build applications. So it's very opinionated, even though Datastar, the library, I don't care. You do write plugins, do whatever you want. Like you could write HX Boost all day long.
Right. And this is just to say that like when I'm saying, hey, you're building like SPA, that's kind of like what I mean, right? It's like the SPAs of like 2013, right? Like where you go to the page, you see like an empty page, or you see like the brackets and like replace with the title here, right? Like the JavaScript didn't boot yet, so like it didn't replace the title yet. So it's like,
But that will never happen in Datastar. That's the part I'm having a hard time with because you send down the page, you can do a full paint of the entire state on the first paint. It's the exact same.
you could, but
No,
also
that's what you do in Datastar. You send down the whole thing and then you
could.
start updating the page. That's what you do. Like it's the same as HTMX.
Uh, and I have very similar issues with HTMX, but HTMX they support HX Boost, so I can do more of that stuff kind of like out of the box, right? I can just add one attribute and get different behavior compared to like
You
writing
can
my
do the
own
exact
plugin.
same thing in Datastar. I keep saying that. And it's like it doesn't seem to like I don't know what's not clicking there that you can start the page, go back to the server and just update any part of the page. It basically works the equivalent of out of band updates of anywhere on the page, and it just uses the IDs and automatically does the morphs for you. Like everything you can do in Datastar with that, the things that you do in HX Boost, you could have a single page where you have one like just open connection, or you make them whenever you could do polling, you can do all this stuff. Everything that you're talking about, you could 100% do in Datastar today, right now.
Well, I think I have trouble with arguments like you could do that because it's like, well, it's a Turing complete language. Like I can just go back to like JavaScript and just like write anything that I want. I can just like as a data star attribute, I can just download HTMX and add HX Boost, right? So like you could do
No,
that.
I'm saying
It's
that
just
you
you
don't
can
need
document.
HTMX Boost is a moot point because you can do you could literally build a single page app where you're doing everything even with a single get. You could have a single get to the backend saying updates, and you could do everything that you're doing in HX Boost natively, and it'd actually be faster because you're reducing the latencies. Because instead of going back and forth, you're actually having a one-way pass going down.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Okay.
So the example that I was talking about, right? So like the SPAs of like 10 years ago, the way that you know it's an SPA is that for the first few seconds you see kind of like everything kind of like moving up and down, and it's like all the libraries are downloading, right? And it's like now the plugin for the sidebar is loaded. Now the plugin for the main thing is loaded, right? And you would get situations where you have like empty pages at the start, right? You have like some sort of spinners at the start. You have like I see this in Google products all the time because they're using like a very old like Angular version. You will go to the page and it has like brackets underscore like hello underscore user, right? And then JavaScript loads and like you see the like the username, right? So like all of this kind of like you see all the guts of the SPA application kind of like booting up, right? And it's like now you see that like way less, right? Now you kind of like with like modern frameworks, modern JavaScript frameworks, it's like, oh, let's do SSR, let's kind of like download everything and all that stuff, right? But like SPAs of 10 years ago, that would that would have like hx get like on load, right? So like, and
Right.
this is the section that like that is rendered by this partial. Like I don't want to embed it or like kind of like ssr it right in right in the page. I will just add an hx attribute so like it could pull it in.
But why
And
wouldn't you? That's the part I don't understand. Like on your first paint, if you have data, you just send down that data instantly. Like that's part of your first paint. Like
yeah,
there's not
and
what. How is this anything like SPA? If it's the opposite, is that you send down all the data and then you can do partial updates as you choose. It's the opposite of what you're
right,
saying.
and again, like I get the argument that you could do that,
No,
could do
that's how you do it. That's the default. Why do you keep saying you could do it that way? That's how all of this stuff works.
Well,
Like,
remember the example that you sent me today with Datastar Astro counter,
well, that's someone else's example. That's not my
right?
example. Like,
But like, why do you think people go there? Like, why do you think people like by default they don't do the thing that you could do, but they do the thing that they did do?
I mean, I think some of it is a lot of people are coming from SPAs and stuff where they like that's kind of the default way of doing things is that you load an empty page and you start filling it out. That's a SPA thing to do. I don't do SPA stuff. Like the whole point is to actively not do that. I do server side rendering and then I start updating the page as I get more data.
Well,
Like
you
I deal
can't
with tens of
server side
thousands of like
everything.
messages a second and then do back pressure and all these other things. Like my way of doing things is not what a normal CRUD PHP developer is doing. Like I can't speak for them, but I can say that what you're saying is the opposite of the way that we tell people to do things. We say render the whole page. In fact, we say use gross, big. Like instead of appending to a table, just send down the whole table. It's fast enough. Like it's a non-issue. Why are you making it complicated on yourself? Like don't do that. We're the opposite of what you're saying. That's why it's like it's that part's frustrating is that we render the whole page. We're not saying you could do that. We're saying that's what you do, and then you start updating as you go. Like if his initial render didn't include the counter,
Right.
then he did it wrong. Like if you do data on load to load the counter, then he did it wrong. I
Yeah,
don't know what to tell you.
but I think that's still like the conflicting kind of like parts of all of this stuff, right? Is it like, hey, we don't care about like we don't care about HX boost, we don't care about like people being able to use our app without SSR, right? Like the next logical step to
People
jump from
don't.
here.
Well, I want to unpack that one. I want to make sure there's not a miscommunication. Everything's SSR in Datastar. Like from it comes from a like a logical hypermedia standpoint. So I don't. When you say nothing should come from SSR, it's the opposite.
Okay, so it is true that if you have if you have a button that says loading and you have a script that will replace that loading with the content, it is true that it is SSR and it is like hypermedia.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, if I have JavaScript disabled, I will only see the loading, right? Like I won't see the content. So like,
Then you're talking about a different. You're talking about a different semantics in my. You're talking about a different UX. And if you build your UX so it's going to be roughly the same in each case, I think you're doing a disservice to your clients. I think you're building the wrong app if you're like slowly turning those things on and off. Like there are different applications. So for example, and this is a place where Datastar is very different than HTMX. Let's say I have a thing where I'm posting a form. Like I filled out a form, right? Like let's say this form is to go and do set up a build system in the background, right? So it's going to go and update, like spin up 3 servers and get the results and bring it back to me, right? In HTMX world or in SPA world, like you would basically wait till that you go do that thing and then you send back a response and then maybe set up a queue to the like poll for that thing to happen, right? Like there's a long running task. Whereas with Datastar, you send a thing, you open up that SSE, and you start sending back like, hey, here's where I'm at in this process of setting up these servers. Here's where I'm spinning things. It's going to be updating, sending out fragments, and then as you get done, then it closes. So it's not, it doesn't have to be open all the time, but it can be open for that process. So you get instant feedback. So instead of waiting, the general case with HTMX and with SPAs is you're waiting for that JSON to be returned, right? It's not like a partial update. So you're waiting till the very end. Whereas with Datastar, you're doing it immediately. And so everything feels way more responsive. And it's going to the server in a real world case, it's going to be more responsive than even a SPA is because we start sending back down things immediately.
Right. So I think like the problem is that like you're doing what I'm doing. I'm arguing against the worst possible user of Datastar, and I'm saying, hey, look how badly they're doing everything, right? And you are saying, hey, look at the worst possible way of using HTMX or SPAs, and
Well,
this is what you get, right?
so explain to me if you were doing that situation where someone's doing something in the back end and it takes more than 10 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds, how would
Again,
you
it's
do
a
that? You would wait till the
complete
end,
language.
right?
It's a Turing complete language. I can do all the same things with it, right? It's like it is possible, even if you use React to open WebSockets. It is
For
possible.
sure, but that's not any example of anything that you'll ever see. Like, go to our polling example on our site and see that we do it with one single get, right? Like it's one update and it's less code, it's smaller, it's tighter. I dare you to do that in React. You cannot do it in that amount of code. It is not possible in React to do that.
Right. So the way to do it in React is kind of like two things. So one is again the modern generation frameworks, like Remix and such. They have a way for you to kind of like to call the server, so that server returns you like promise or iterable, like whatever, right? So like you could do that, and now with like React server components, they also like building it into React, right? So like most of the modern frameworks, they have a way to do like SSEs and get information over time. So it's like, will you see that on the first page in React? Maybe not. Will you see that on the first page in Datastar? Yes, you will.
I guess the thing is that you're doing so many hoops to do something that's like one line of code. Like even the amount of code that's running in your backend, you're running so much through so many more hoops than you are just sending the data as you need it. Like you don't need all these hoops. Is I guess. Do you remember back in the like I don't know how long you've been doing this, but like when I was doing a bunch of JVM stuff in Pojos and like Spring Boot was just starting to come around. Then you saw the DHH did the Ruby on Rails thing of like, why are you guys making this so hard? Like doing a Java, like putting an application onto Glassfish and stuff was a big deal and all this. And he's like, why don't you just respond to requests over HTTP? Like, what are we doing here? I feel like that's what's going on with Datastar. Like, I see what you guys are doing. I know how RSC works. I've read all the source. I've gone into the weeds on it, and I'm like, why are you doing all this when you just need to do a flushed set of bytes here with a new line? What are we doing? Like, what are you guys doing? That's like, if you look at Datastar, it has SDKs, but the SDKs are literally like 4 lines long of like, here's how you send the thing. That's it. Like, it's 4 lines of code. Why do you need RSC? Why do you need to have these promises? What are you doing with your life? Like, what's going on here?
Right.
Help me.
Before we get into like the short amount of code and all that stuff,
Sure.
I just want to kind of like finish the thought. Right. It's like when you are like when you're promoting Datastar as the thing that like hates HX Boost, as a thing that like hates like it doesn't like by default supports people with JavaScript disabled, all that stuff. It's like it's the very next thing that you're going to ask is like, why would it make my life harder on initial load to render counter 0 if what I can do is just to reuse the same kind of like API that I already have? Yes, it will like wait for JavaScript to load, but like who cares? I'm already building application that requires JavaScript, right? So like, do you see how that's like a kind of like path you're paving here, and that's how
No,
you get.
unfortunately I don't. And here's why: is that when you build your first template, if you build a template that says we have something on a page and we have a counter, right? That counter thing is also another little sub template or a fragment in the HTMX world of the counter with this state equals this. So that just becomes part of your initial load of your page of saying, hey, my initial page is count. I put in the fragment that says count 0. It's now part of the template. It's part of your templating, not part of any other. It's part of the logic of your templates and rendering that down. There's no extra step to do. Like there's no other step to do than what you're already doing. It's almost like you're making it a thing that doesn't exist. Like it
Well,
does not exist.
I think there is kind of like an argument for like doing it that way, right? So like imagine you have um, like you already have this API that can return a partial, right? And
Mhm.
that API has I don't know, like a cookie check or like whatever, like right? It's like you already have all of that code there. Now you also need to figure out how to like pull it in and run it on every like page that could use that component, right? Like using a component as just like as a data attribute, like get me counter, right? Is much more kind of like scalable approach than like making sure that I preloaded everything that like counter needs and then I'm using the counter. What if I like preloaded but like didn't render it, or I tried to render it but like I forgot to preload, right? There's like a more kind of like thing you need to coordinate if you do it the right way, which again it's kind of like it's
I
nice
Well,
nice
it
to
depends on
hear
what you
that
mean
you
by
think it's the
right
right
way.
way, right?
Like one of the things I talk about, I don't know how familiar you are with game development, but I talk about retain mode versus immediate mode, and very much Datastar leans into immediate mode, which is you render what's there when you need it. So, for example, like you, Ryan Carnito talks a lot about solid and about the disappearing components. Like on the wire, there are no components; they don't exist. And like when it actually does the render of the JSX and stuff, what gets rendered is basically the equivalent of fragments. Is what's happening. There are no components in solid at the render level, and that's a beautiful thing. What I'm saying is that if you have something where you have in your thing where you're like, well, if it's loaded and if it's not loaded and if there's state here, that's part of your template of saying if it exists, render this, if not, do this. It's part of the logic of your application. Like it's part of it. It's native to what you're doing. And the thing is, if you don't have a lot of state that you're trying to track and stuff, it's so much easier. My code. So there was a little while ago, Theo had a thing where he did did one app and 5 applications, right?
Right.
I don't know if you saw that other thing. And someone linked me to it, and I talked to him a little bit about it. And he did Go dirty. Like he made Go, like Go was the longest one, it was the slowest one, all this stuff. I ended up making mine in Datastar, same app. With I tried to match his code, so I didn't try to play code golf, right, to like make it smaller the way I would want to. I
Right.
made it match his. It was in Go, and it was the smallest one, and it was so much faster, and it only used 13 megs of memory with all the assets and everything. Like it was better in every way. So if that way of the very componentized style with all the like exactly how he wants to use the T3 stack and all that stuff, and I can make something smaller, faster with less code in a natively compiled language, I think my way's better. So I will take any comer when it comes to you build it your way, I'll build it my way, and we'll see whose thing is less code, use less memory, scales higher, has more requests per second, all those things. And I can do it in less code than most of these applications. I'm not saying you, and it's not that I'm a better developer. It's just I take out steps that are just make it easier. My thing will be smaller, it will use less memory, and I'm guessing it'll be less code
Right.
going
So
my way.
I think the how do I say it? There is like a Theo argument, right? So like his whole kind of like personality is that like, well, I'm doing things so I can ship faster, right? So like, why would I spend 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times less like on the server costs, right? If it will not allow me to ship like twice as fast,
And
right?
that's absolutely correct. But I made my code smaller and I built it, and mine's faster. And I bet you it took us about the same amount of time because most of my time was trying to figure out why he was doing things a certain way before I went and did it my way. Like I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to try to match his way. That was the slow part. It wasn't the code. The code was not the issue.
Well, okay. So there are two parts, right? So the one part is that like the kind of like the reductionist part, right? It's like, well, if I just want to go on another page, I will just add a link and you click on it and you go there. Or like, why would you add? How big is the Next.js right now? Like 250 kilobytes of like router and all that crap,
I
right? It's like
guess, yeah.
do I need to send all of those kilobytes just to click on the link, right? Like there is like a reductionist kind of like argument. It's just like, well, just do less stuff, and it's like, yes, you will get like a different trade-offs, but doing less stuff is also like a good thing by itself. So it's like sometimes that wins. The other argument is kind of like the scalability, right? So there is kind of like an argument of like, well, the bad things are winning because they are bad. Everyone is bad, and like the React is more popular just because it's bad, right? Well,
Is it bad or is it convenient? I think it's convenient.
uh,
People get used to a certain way of working, and then they can find a tutorial on it, and then they can find a boot camp, and that's convenient. It's not about learning the underlying tech.
yeah, well, my kind of like introduction to all of this thing as a backend developer, I got kind of like introduced to React when it was just out, when it wasn't like the default option, when it wasn't like the thing, and I was like talking our CTO into using React, and I
Yeah.
had to argue, it's like, hey, here's what it does, here's what it like doesn't do, and all that stuff, right? So like for me, a lot of those arguments of like, well, that was just the first link in a Google, and I clicked on it, and like I never thought since, right? So like that's not that's not kind of
Yeah,
like
no, I started using React around 0.6, like right around then. So I agree with you. It was a different beast back then, but that's not what we're talking about, right? Like that was a different time.
so the argument goes is like, well, like the popular thing is bad because it's bad, and like all the
No, I
people
don't.
who like it are bad, right? The popular thing in case of React, I think, happens because like in a big Uh, the analogy that I like to do is the like multi-threading, right? So like in operating systems, you have like cooperative multi-threading and like preemptive multi-threading, right? Where multitasking, where you either make your system kind of like as efficient and as fast as possible on kind of like one extreme, or you do it as like reliable as possible on another extreme, right? So in reality, it's somewhere like in between all that stuff, but like if you value more your system kind of like staying up, you will go kind of like that way, right? But like, oh, but like I don't have like the CPU resources. Oh, just wait 5 years and it's going to be 1,005 times faster, right? So I see kind of like in in the kind of like the article as like worse is better, right? It's like TypeScript is much slower than Go, right? The type system. Well, Go is a bad example, but there are better like type systems, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
No
they're
one uses Go for its type system.
yeah,
Nobody.
yeah, exactly. So there are like better type systems. There are better like whatever. Like they're faster compilers and all that stuff. It's like you can go kind of like and pick all of those things, right? Like why did why did React win, quote unquote, right? Depending if you think it won or not. But I I think because they were like erring on the side of kind of like this like preemptive multitasking, they were making sure that while the operations kind of like by operation, right? They might not be like the most optimal ones and whatnot, but the system overall was like kind of like stable enough so that if you work in Facebook with like 100,000 developers and one of them kind of like pushes like bad code, right? You don't halt the kind of like the whole system. It has kind of like enough kind of like a leeway to kind of like to survive through that, right? And the unfortunate reality is that you could also write like his kind of like React application better. You could also write his like Svelte application better, and so on, right? Like not he wasn't doing the bad application just for Go. He was doing kind of like bad applications for all of them, right? But the bad application in Go can kind of like crash kind of like more catastrophically
See,
in a bigger team in a scaling sense.
I think you should look at his code because he wrote the best. He said like he's really proud of the T3 stuff and what he built in the TypeScript side. And he was like, "Yeah, we don't really know Go. We don't really care about Go." So it's the opposite, at least in that specific situation with the Theo thing. Is he built the T3 thing like this is the way you should be building things, and then they kind of did a oh yeah, and here's Go, and it's not that great, and it's a lot of code. It's like yeah, because you built it wrong, and it's like that's why it's bad. But like if you build it right, it's smaller and it's faster in every metric.
Yeah,
So
what I said is that like maybe he's like T3 app is the best T3 app that you can write, but like his React app is not the best React app that you can write.
That is definitely possible. And I guess the way I look at it is, if you go onto the if you want, like I said before, if you don't want JS, just don't use JS, right? But if you do want JS and you want to have this fast reactive like thing that can update from CRUD all the way to real time systems and have the exact same code base, right? It's a one time 14K cost, or 12K right now, 12.9K cost. So it's even on a 3G connection, it's 8 milliseconds to get down in cache. And it's a one-time cost. It is nothing like the world that they're trying to progressively enhance into. We get that from day one with like a tiny little shim. If you're going to go that route, if you're going to have a reactive interactive page, like we get that within like microseconds. I don't know how we're having a conversation about it being the same. It's not at all the same in my mind. Like it's so much less data. Everything you're basically doing the equivalent of server side rendering for everything. Everything's faster. Like I don't see the equivalency. I really don't.
Okay, there are like a couple of topics that I want to touch on, but
Sure.
I'm not sure how much more time I have.
Let's do it, and let's see. Because the thing is, I am very combative with a lot of this stuff, right? Like I've been around, I have enough gray hair to have some pretty strong opinions here. Either I tend to have no opinion or strong opinion, right? Like I don't think React did the wrong thing, but so this is kind of like on the side, but it feels very much similar to what's happening to React. I come from game development, and the two things in that space are Unity and Unreal, right? Like those are like, if people aren't writing your own game engine, you're using one of those two. The thing is, Unity's core was actually pretty decent back when it was like a Mac only thing before it was V1 and all this. Like it was actually a really decent little tiny engine. The thing is, they weren't built to be expanded. They weren't built with like a overall sense of what you need to do. So everyone started building these really bad plugins, and they're the game engine didn't matter anymore. It was about the marketplace and all these other things, and it's these ideas, and it won, and then it's collapsing on itself because like that's a bad way to build a game engine. So people are like, Unity is the most successful. It's more successful than Unreal and all that stuff. And Unreal's like, I don't give two shits. We're writing game engines, not marketplaces. Like, what are you doing? I feel like that's what's happening. React is the Unity in this example of like it may be successful in the market share, but it's gonna collapse on itself when someone finally goes, oh, this is really good. And I think the thing that I think is interesting about this is I think hypermedia is the right answer, but I think right now people are equating hypermedia with HTMX, and HTMX is not a full solution. It's not that HTMX is bad; it just does not solve the whole thing. So you need a framework that's actually. I think we're more like Unreal. We're just chugging around doing our thing, and we can make better, faster apps that are smaller. And I think in the long run, I hope that wins, or someone makes a better set of plugins that are similar to Datastar. I don't care if Datastar wins. I care that people understand that you're off in this crazy world of marketplaces and grabbing plugins and grabbing assets and building these shitty games, as opposed to like actually understanding the underlying tech and building good games. Like I want craftsmanship in the web, and I don't care if React's winning right now. I think that's a fad, and it will go away when people understand that they can be craftsmen and build things faster than they can using these assets. If that makes sense.
Right. Well, the handmade kind of like argument is it was happening for like web components for a while, right? It's like web
Yeah.
components are the most optimal, the lowest kind of like level, which is like bare to the metal. I'm writing it. But it's like, okay, 10 years have passed. Like how many like popular kind of like
But
components
okay,
are out there?
and you have an excellent point with that, and I think that I was part of that too. Like I thought web components were the dumbest thing in the world, right? Like why do I need a web component? I already have my state in my Vue app or my React app or Ember or whatever thing of the day, right? Web components didn't make any sense. When you're hypermedia driven and you can encapsulate that state inside of a web component and keep it, like if you have a calendar or a 3D engine or any of these things, keep that state there. It's not that you get rid of JavaScript, you just put it state in the right place. That's all that matters. So my thing is, if you have internal state, it should be a web component, and then you drive it with Datastar. But those are two different things that you're doing. One is driving it, one is building internal state. It's all about state management. I mean, that's every computer science problem, right?
Well, the argument is that like, well, if it was if it was like so much better, right? Why don't we have kind of like, why isn't everything like a kind of like a web component, right? And it's like, if Unreal is like so much better, why all the bad mobile games are using Unity?
Well, and I think that the answer is if you're doing spa development, web components are not this giant like factor of making your life better. If you're doing spa, web components don't help you that much. They just don't, unless you have some weird situation where you have micro frameworks and that craziness, where you have people, one team using Vue and one team using React and all that. Then web components make some sense. But if you're doing hypermedia first, then all of a sudden web components give you this major boost. That I built a full 3D engine in like a couple of web components. That's amazing. That's what it should be used for. But most people should not be building web components. Most of the time, you should just be rendering down DOM elements. That's it. Like people overcomplicate it. So I think it's a superpower if you're doing hypermedia first. But people, I know that a year and a half ago, when I finally like let Carson know about what Datastar was doing, he didn't even know. I was the one telling him about web components. He didn't even know about it, and we had a conversation like, hey, this is really good with web components. He's like, yeah, I never looked at that. I don't care. So the problem is, I think hypermedia is getting equated with HTMX instead of with the overall focus on hypermedia. That's my issue.
Yeah, so I wanna kind of like talk a bit about more the kind of like the scaling kind of like aspect of all of this. So I'm trying to write like a kind of like a small web components library. Sorry, it's smaller than Datastar.
Why were you sorry?
Well, I don't know. You seem to be very specific that like the Datastar is like the smallest thing out there.
Well, it's the smallest thing that does what it does, right? Like if you want to use
Well,
Alpine and
React.
you want to use HTMX,
Yeah,
it is
the
by far
problem is that
smaller.
the problem is that argument is like React is also the smallest the thing that does that, right? It's like if you want to do everything that React does, well, that's the smallest thing. It's like React 18, which is like 30 kilobytes smaller than React 19. It's smaller because it doesn't do everything that React
But you
19
can't turn things on and off, right? Because the thing is, Datastar itself is 4K.
Again, it just kind of like in a passing.
Okay.
There are smaller libraries. That's what I was going to say. But I'm writing this kind of like uh, I'm working on this project, and we're using web components, and we are using them in very kind of like HTML first way, and that's kind of like how that's kind of like why you have to use web components, because otherwise it's kind of like it gets into a mess pretty quickly. And uh, my kind of like biggest issue with the system that I'm building, right, is like I see how like that wouldn't scale. Like I see that like the handmade argument is like, oh, I can do this thing like much faster if I go kind of like abstraction deeper, right? Like if I do like this thing kind of like simpler, if I do that thing simpler, right? But I have to do things kind of like inefficiently, right? So that it's kind of like more reusable, so it's like more scalable and so on. In scalable, not in the milliseconds on the cluster of like so many machines, right? Scalable in a sense of 100 developers who don't know what they're doing, right? So that they can like ship something.
I come from game development, and most game teams for giant titles that you've seen, like name a game, and there was probably 6 to 8 engineers that actually worked on it. So I see giant FPSs and giant uh, real time strategy things, and even things that in I worked on The Sims a bit, and like I've been at EA. I've seen how the sausage is made. Most things are not don't need 100 developers. That is just that's a crazy town thing. If you're doing that, then you don't. Then there's a deeper issue there. If you need that many people, like Gmail was written by like 3 people. Like I just don't believe that you need 100 developers to build most web applications. I just don't think that that's accurate. And like I know it's like get good, but I don't believe that you need hundreds of developers to build almost any site that I've ever seen. And we deal with some pretty big, like I work on at Synadia on Nats during the day, and we see some pretty big things. And I've never come across that where you need hundreds of developers. I just don't believe it. So
Right, and this is again like for the marketing kind of like keyword of like you can build everything, right? It's like, well, you could build everything, but if your thing is a thing that you can kind of like keep in mind, as like it's kind of like a Rails argument. Rails is great as long as you have like kind of like less than 3 people, and each of them can like imagine in their head like the whole code base, and because the syntax is small, it's easy to imagine like the whole code base, right? While that works, it's all fine. Then you scale up to like GitHub level, right, where you have like 1,000 developers working on it, and it's like you go to the GitHub and it's like it just like it doesn't pull the latest like the like a CI status, or just like the whole web page flashes because like they overpulled it, right? So it's like that sort of thing kind of like breaks down at some sort of scale. And this is like my argument against HTMX as well, because it's like hxget slash API slash thing, right? What if it's slash APIs and that's not slash API, right? So like this like string based type safety, right? So like in Datastar, everything is just the key value of string to string, right? And it's like,
Yeah,
well,
that's how declarative works. You could say the same thing, I guess, of SQL. Like SQL is just a string. Everything is anything that is declarative by definition is an expressive piece of like it's an expressive set of bytes by definition. Like it has to be evaluated. It is a declarative thing. Like if you embrace declarativeness, great. If you want to do procedural, then you should do it all in WASM and open up a canvas and just rock it. Like that's the right answer. Like you do, if you are using the web and you're using HTML, you are doing declarative programming. Like embrace that or don't do it. Like that's fine too, right? Write a native app. That's totally fine. But if you're doing hypermedia, you're doing declarative strings. Guess what? HTML is just one big string.
right. And that's why kind of like the worse is better, right? Like that's why you don't write HTML in React. If you have a function that like you click on a button and like something needs to happen on the backend, you don't write like action equals slash API slash something, right? You write action equals like this function that I imported from that file, right? So like that, so that
But you do the
TypeScript or
same
that
thing in
bundler can check that and like make sure that like all the references are matching and all that stuff.
but you literally can do that in the same way in again, it's not a Daystar versus HTMX. It's HTMX. You do the same thing in your templating language. You define what valid URLs and all that stuff. Like that's part of how you define the state of your templates. Like your template should know what a valid URL is and what it's not, and it should be like, oh, it would never do that. That's part of your backend language. That has nothing to do with SPAs or React or anything. Like that's part. If your HTMX isn't doing that, you're failing there too.
Yeah, well, my argument is that like Ruby, for example, like doesn't have a compiler, right? Like they don't have like a kind of like TypeScript, even like TypeScript level checking of like, is this a string, is it a number, all that stuff, right? It's just all dynamic, everything, like all the fields exist and all the objects and all that stuff, right? And again, it's great. Like if you know that you have posts, like that's, and you know that like post slash new is a route that exists, you can just like use that, right? It gets trickier where like, well, the posts are like handled by this team of like 10 people, and the authors are handled by this team of 10 people, and like no one knows whose like strings everywhere is, right? And you could use like a bit more structure, right? You can have
Yes.
like a file with all the like the URLs, kind of like
Or you just have a
as
map in
variables, right?
memory that says like this is a XY problem in my mind. Like you're making a problem that has nothing to do with hypermedia or that is a internal communication issue. Like React doesn't solve this for you. You still have the same thing of I have a map somewhere in memory that has here's the valid URLs that are available. Here's a way to construct a URL based off of our structure and what's going on. Like here's how you create a breadcrumb. Here's how you do it. Like these are all things that do not go away with Datastar. It's just that you have them in the language of your backend. Like you have them in your language. It's not something that goes away. Like if you're hard coding strings, it doesn't matter if you're in React or in Datastar or in HTMX, you're going to have a bad day. If those things are dynamic, built out of your templates, which JSX is just a template, it's the same problem. Like React doesn't get you anywhere with this. It doesn't help you in any way more than the Datastar or HTMX way. It doesn't help you because it's the same problem.
Well, it's not the same problem, right? So, like, if I have a data star that is going to put like my output of the search in ID equals search result, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like a inherently kind of like a not as safe operation as like set state search results, right? Because
Why?
like because if I do search result instead of search results, like TypeScript will yell at me and say, "Hey, this variable doesn't exist." If
The
I'm
exact same thing will happen in Datastar if you build your things in your language of choice. If you built a thing that says I'm using these IDs and the ID is a const or a variable inside of my thing that gets passed out, like if it's a const that you're sitting down in your language, you have the exact same thing. It's the same
Well,
thing.
that's just half of it, right? Like it could be checking that like the string is the same, right? It could be checking that like search result and like search results are like two different IDs, right? Like and it knows which one to pick. But like there is nothing that will like ensure, for example, that like I have that ID rendered, right? Like it's like it's rendered in the sidebar and the button is in the main tag, and it's like those things are like separate enough so that like sometimes the sidebar doesn't have that ID booted up, right? Like it will result in like a runtime error at some point.
You would get the same thing in React if you have something that exists in one area and not in another, and it's conditional. How is that different?
I won't, right? So if I so if I have uh, let's say like Redux, right? So it's like just like a global thing. I can just like touch it from everywhere, right? So like I'm in this component and I'm setting search results. I'm setting them kind of like safely because like I'm talking to this global variable, basically, right? And in that other place, I'm importing from that global variable. I don't talk directly to that thing, right? Like I don't have to wait for this thing to exist. It could be like loading still, and like it shows up in like 2 seconds, right? I don't have to worry about that because I have like this like variable, right? TypeScript, kind of like a object or whatever that I can talk to. Or like if you're talking about refs in React, right? I create a ref and like I use it in like multiple places. I have like an in JSX, I'm saying like ref equals like something, right? And I have a use effect that like touches that ref. I don't search by ID inside of use effect like for a thing, right? I'm like using the like kind of like the safer or like more
You get
scalable.
the same thing in your backend language of choice if you have a const of the name of the ID or whatever, and if you're doing SSE events of updating, like you get all the same benefits. That's why like there's something a disconnect there because you think that JS is suddenly doing something that any other templating language in any other language can't do, and it can. Like if you have an ID that's shared between these things, then that's something that should be sent. Like that's part of your state is this ID that's shared in all these different places. That's a const in that not maybe not constant for your entire application, but that's a variable within the generation of those templates. Like there's nothing special that's going on there. And if you want something that is completely reactive that's in different places, then use a signal. Signals are built into Datastar. Like you get all the same things with that, and you get them declaratively. So instead of having to set use effect and do the set state and get state and all that everywhere, you just do it declarative. Like here's the name of the signal. That's it. You're done. There's no more things you have to do. You do data dash text the thing, the signal name, and you're done. Like that's it. It's
Right.
simpler.
And the
It's less
signal name
code.
is also a constant.
What's that?
And the signal names have to be also a constant.
That again, if it's shared in multiple places, then make it a constant. If it's something that is like reactive, like the thing is, you're not. What my thing is, you keep pushing the problem instead of just realizing the problem is the problem. Like it doesn't go magically away because you have this extra state in your front end. It doesn't go away. It's the same problem, but now you have state in multiple places. Whereas my way of doing it, you have it in one place.
Right. I think that I hear again like the could argument is like yes you could do that, but I'm just thinking that like the person who is going to be like enchanted by Datastar, they're probably working on like a smaller application where they do kind of like more shortcuts where they might do that once they get to the scale where they will
The
start.
stuff I'm working on right now, for example, the kind of things that Datastar is built for is handling hundreds of millions of updates an hour in real time.
But
So I
that's not
don't
the
know what.
scale that I'm talking about.
Well, the thing is, when you're talking about like what kinds of problems are you having where you're saying, what do you consider a small scale application then? Because it has deeply nested things coming from multiple, like it's the equivalent of like the US tax code. There's a million different forms that have to happen to make that happen. And you're doing all these progress things that are everything's updating live. You have all these charts. For most whole companies, this would be considered a very big app. So explain to me what scale means to you, because to me, that's a single person thing. That is not a big deal.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the same thing with Rails, right? So like Rails is great and can like for building an app right until the like the limit of like where a person could kind of like understand everything, right? After that, you kind of like have to like invent kind of like systems on top of Rails, like exporting all of the like IDs or whatever we were talking about, right? Or you just like give up and like rewrite everything in Java. It's going to be less efficient. It's going to be less easy to update and so on. But like for
But where's that scale difference? That's the thing I don't understand. You're saying that there's a certain scale where this doesn't work. What scale does it not work at? Because you still have the same thing of you send down the updates for the things that are changing on the page.
right,
Nothing
I
about
think
that
that
changes.
yeah, I
Like, how
think
does
that
that change
yeah,
as
I
you scale
think
up?
the easiest way to there is this service chaos monkey or something like that that
Mm-hmm.
is like will just like go and like randomly kill your nodes, right? So I think the scale that I'm talking about is imagine you have like at least one, let's say, junior developer that just like does random PRs to different parts of your code. Like, will your code base survive? Right? So like that's the sort of scale that I'm talking about.
Then that you're talking about not a technical issue, but a social issue.
Yeah, exactly, and that's
Okay,
how we
you
get
cannot use, I will say that you cannot
context.
use technical answers to solve social problems. That is a non sequitur.
Well, they
Like,
try, right? Like with
I well then you shouldn't, because that's like saying I can make a game where I can have infinite number of grass leaves in my thing. Like, no, you know the levels and you know what is expected, that we have grass in our game and we can have this many polys, and like the computer is a constraint. You have to know your constraints. And to say I can just throw a Java or a junior dev at my thing and it'll magically work. No, but I can guarantee you're going to have a worse time if you're doing that in like a spa, like web app. You can break something immediately by overfetching. Here's my problem: is that every time I've seen any spa development, I'm to blame too. I'm part of this. Is like I had top secret clearance for a while and worked on military stuff, right? The most dangerous thing in web development is oversharing data. And it is almost impossible to not do that with a SPA. It's basically impossible to do. You're over always, even with the GraphQL and all that, I don't care. Like, you're always over fetching data. And doing it this way, you are guaranteed that you're not going to overshare data. You are getting what you put into your PR. So if someone's putting a bad PR, I can't stop them, but I can say that this template is only showing you what's going on now, and there's no state of letting you know what the internals are. Like, it's like a bank account. If you render someone's like details on, like, here's your transactions, they don't have any access to change the transaction. They don't have any way to know when what server that's on or anything. Like, they have no idea. Whereas if you're pulling in JSON, they have full access to see, like, oh, well, there's this little piece. Oh, they're only grabbing this piece right now. Oh, this is how they structure their data. That gives you ideas into insights of what's going on. Oh, I can look at the headers. Like, there's all these things that just completely go away doing hypermedia first. And that's way more important for ramping someone up. Trying to ramp someone up to a security heavy thing is incredibly hard. And you're talking about like just someone like throwing up some code and will it break? I don't care about that as much as I care about the security of not leaking data. That's way more important in my mind.
Right. But like the argument of like trying to find technical solution for like a personal problem, right? That's the whole idea of like micro frontends, right?
Oh, and I think you're wrong. I just think those people are wrong, and like prove me wrong that that ever works. It's the Conway. The problem is it's Conway's law, and for people that don't know, Conway's law is that your code base looks like the your organization over a long enough time frame, and that's that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with an XY problem. You're trying to solve it with technology, and that never works. It never works. It's like it's the million man, or it's the put 100 people on a project and it'll get 100 times done. It's just not reality. So, and I think game dev has made me very conscious of what you can do with a small dedicated team, that I don't care about the 100-man teams, because I think none of them should exist.
Right. Yeah, and unfortunately, I think his name is Spiro. He posted a while. It's like I just had a discussion with my boss. He said, "Yes, this thing that you're doing with HTMX by your own, we could easily replace you with a team of React developers." Right. that's the that's the that's the mentality, unfortunately, for a lot of this stuff, right? It's like the team of React developers is kind of like is homogeneous. You can just like pull in and out like any person in it, right? And for businesses, they will like hire the team first, and then they try to find a technical solution. And if you hire the team of 10 people, they're going to use the solution that works for 10 people, even though this could have been solved by like one person, right?
Well, and that's the weird thing is every place, not at Synadia, but just about every place I've been before that, um, I was always hired on as a back end dev or something like that, or building tools and stuff. And then I ended up like taking over the front ends, and I would replace 6 or 7 people, and it like made them look bad. I'm like, no, I just like don't do all the steps they were doing. Like I simplified things and it made it easier. So my thing is, I can't, like, if you're happy with the status quo and you're happy as being part of the, like, being replaceable of a React dev, okay, I'm not going to try to solve that for you. Like, I care about shipping stuff, and your way doesn't work. And if it worked, I wouldn't be able to compete with you. I wouldn't be able to make things smaller. My code is smaller in a typed language, and it's faster, and it's small. Like that should not be fair. I shouldn't be able to get done as fast. I should be getting it done in 3 or 4 times the speed, right? I get it done faster than you. And I will put myself up against anyone in this space. Like if you want to make an app like the way you want, and I'll take that app and port it over, mine will be faster. And then we can do the thing of like make the best version you want of yours. I will do it, and we'll time how much time we do. We could do a live coding session, and like it's not going to be orders of magnitude, and it's going to be cheaper. So my way is cheaper because hiring me for 3x React Dev, and I can replace 10 developers. You're saving money. I don't know any business that doesn't think that's a good idea.
Right. But there like a there is a problem with the people who can like single-handedly replace a team. Like they're usually like antisocial enough so that like businesses see them as like a risk, not as a
No, it's a valid. That is a very valid point. My thing is, I want to see the overall products succeed, right? And a lot of times is that it's kind of like once you get to 10 developers for just a front end, you're getting infighting and all kinds of other stuff. Like it's chaos because everyone has these different opinions. Because even though they're all replaceable in that world, they all have different opinions on what set of plugins they like out of that. Like it's the Unity asset store. Well, I like this asset. Well, I like this one. Well, but they completely disagree with each other. They have nothing to do with the thing you're actually building, right? So like it's more about getting rid of that chaos. So is it, my thing is that if you give people the right tools, I don't think that you have like, I don't see React devs as these mindless drones. I see it as like, look, this is how you get a job in today's thing. Like you do leak code. Leak code has nothing to do with the job. Everyone knows this yet. Everyone's playing this game. I would never get another regular job because I wouldn't be able to do leak code. I just don't remember how to reverse a binary search tree because I don't do it that often. And when I do, I look it up and I make sure I do it right. Like I sit down and do it right, and I don't try to do it from memory. Like that's, to me as a senior guy, that the dumbest thing is to try to memorize that stuff. I have other things to memorize, like larger scale things. So I'm on board with the, if you give the right, all these people that are drones right now in this space the right tools, well then it's better for everybody. Like everyone wins. Like you can replace people with AI if this is the kind of thing they're doing, but you can't replace actual engineers that actually ship things. Like that's just not going to happen, as far as I can tell. And if they can, great. Then I'll retire early.
Yeah, I would also note that like the like Go using Go is a bit of a cheating thing because it's like yes, it is as fast as well, almost as fast as like any kind of like compiled language, right? But all the sensibilities are the kind of like of the scripting
Well,
way.
and even that, what's weird is I actually wrote a game engine for Go, and people were like, "That's the dumbest thing in the world. Like, why would you do that?" But the thing is, about people always think like, just because it's kind of like Datastar, just because there's signals doesn't mean you need to use signals. Just because there's like SSE stuff doesn't mean you have to use that, right? You can not do it. The thing is, I wrote a game engine, and it uses Swiss tables and sparse sets and like a bunch of ECS stuff, and then it wraps it in these nice Fluent APIs and stuff. But the irony is, I put it against um, the fastest C version of it. It's like Flex, and I'm within like 15% of that, of the fastest thing in C there is in the world, and it's right within the range because I'm like not using GC when you shouldn't use GC. Like, yeah, like don't do that. Like, so it's the same kind of thing. Like, have the tools, have the power. I feel like Datastar is the same kind of thing. Whereas just because it's like it has all these features and it can do class animation and SSE and viewing and showing and all this stuff. Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to use it every time. In fact, most of the time you should use very little Datastar. The irony is that Datastar for me was done like a year ago because it has like the 2 or 3 tags I really need, and everything else is like, yeah, I'll bring that up if I need it, right? But now it has all these features that affect can do anything a spa can do, but I just don't need them most of the time. So they're there, but you don't put sparkles in, you don't put like the rainbow sparkles in your Dark Souls game. Just because you have the ability to add that particle doesn't mean you should add sparkles and like rainbows to your enemies. Like I guess that's my mentality in general. Like I love having the tools available and not using them unless I come to that situation.
Right. I think that argument would have worked. Um, for me, it works better for something like Solid because or even Svelte 5 now. Um, they have this like 3 shakeable library, so that like if you don't use suspense, like that
Mm-hmm.
code doesn't ship. If you don't use, for example, like in Solid, like in a lot of my applications, I don't use the rendering code, right? So like the solid slash web, like a
Mm-hmm.
render function, like I don't use it, so like I can shave off like 5 kilobytes gzip or something like that, right? So again, this is like a bit of like conflicting kind of like marketing is like, well, if you want to do things like that, you need to have a build tool, right? And you need to have like the thing that can analyze all the usage that you have and like produce the bundle that is like specific for your application, right? Like if you stop using that feature, like it automatically falls away. In your case, right? Like I have to do all of this manually, and it's like even in that example with like the counter that you sent me is like I try to find a bundle that will work for a counter, and the way that it doesn't work, it just doesn't work. Like you click on a button and nothing happens, right? Like I'm not getting an error or something like that because like again like the kind of like string based type safety and all that stuff is like, well, this attribute is like not uh, whatever the because everything is a safe data dash something attribute. Browser can just safely ignore it and like not do
Right.
anything, right? And it's like if you have an application, you're like, oh, I want to trim down my bundle a bit. Let me remove that feature. I have to write the kind of like end-to-end, like playwright kind of like level test for everything that I have on my website to check
I,
if removing this thing is safe, right?
Right. I do get your point. And so there's a couple things there is that one of the things that I was playing around with was, hey, you let me run on like basically have another thing that's not turned on, like a data dash inspect that basically would just watch all the keys and look at all the things that you're doing and then basically keep track of it all. And then you could basically send that to data bundle, right? My thing, the way I look at it is Datastar is less than 13K. It's 8 milliseconds on a 3G connection. It's more important to have something cacheable than it is to be the minimal size possible. So cacheability is far more important. And the fact that you can cache it forever and it works for all Datastar sites,
It doesn't, by
like,
the way. This is a feature that they broke like 5 years or more probably
oh,
now.
you mean where you can't use the same script in multiple, but
So
you
if
can
you
use it
have
in your
like
same
yeah, if
domain,
you
right?
have the same CDN, it only allows you to cache it for your like origin. So like
Right, for your
on your
domain, right?
pages it will
Yeah,
work,
yeah.
but like if I go to another
Well,
page,
okay. So for sorry. So at least for your whole site and your whole domain. Okay, but my point is that's more important than shaving off 2 more kilobytes. It does not matter. Like if all of a sudden my line in my head is that if we are smaller than HTMX and we do everything, all these things, then we win. And HTMX is at like 17, 18K right now, right? And people, no one's saying, hey, can we shave off half of HTMX? Everyone's like, it's so great, so small. So my point is, you can shave off all those things if you chose to. And to be fair, you can just do data dash star on your in a regex for your entire app and get out a distinct list. Like this is not a hard thing to do. I disagree with you that you're like, oh, I have to do this crazy playwright thing. No, you just do a regex and then you do it like a grep and then you do a distinct on that. Like I think this is kind of like gilding the lily, as in like this is a non-issue. We are smaller than anyone else doing any of this stuff. So until that becomes an issue, I'm saying that I've already thought about it, but I'm also like the bundler is already confusing enough. I kind of want to make it not there because people are like, oh, I want to get super optimized. And it's like, that's not, we're already so small. In fact, I actually want to, I think I need to go back and add oh, the whole website needs a redesign. Trust me, I know. Because it went from a personal project to like now people are really using it, right? So we're in the middle of doing that. But I want to put a thing up top that's like basically this is 7.2 milliseconds on 3G or something like that. Someone, so you're like, what are you doing with your life? Like, why are you like shaving off these bytes? That is not your real issue. Um,
Right.
so yeah, it's one of those things where
Again, a bit of like kind of like a conflicting marketing of like we are the
uh,
smallest thing possible, but also don't care about that, right? So
well, don't care to a degree, right? Like it's one of those things. Just like in game dev, like when you're building your app, you're saying, "Here's my budgets. Here's what I'm doing. Here's where I'm going," and then it's like, "Oh, but we're also gonna like this is the min specs that we have, and here's the max spec." Like, know what you're hitting, understand that, really care about that, so that like when you double your numbers, all of a sudden life is good, right? Like I'm really concerned about us hitting it correctly, so that we never have to care about it in the long run. So yeah, there is conflicts because the problem is there's a difference between me, the guy who wrote the thing, and people that are using it, right? And I think Ben and a lot of the people that have been helping out with what the Datastar is basically done at this point. And right now it's about documentation and about tone and all that stuff. So if you or anybody else wants to help get in there and help with the docs, that's what we need help with right now. Not the engine's good, like the engine's solid. The thing we need help with is explaining this to people that haven't been doing it 25 years. Don't feel like they can just take on anybody. Like I'll take on any comers. Like when I went to a Big Sky conference, I didn't talk that time, but I went there and Ryan Fleury was doing examples and React and saying, yeah, HTMX can't do that. And I'm like, but I can, but I can't. Right? I kept doing that kind of thing of like these are easy to do in Datastar. This is a non-issue. And they were doing some offline stuff. Well, data dash on dash online and offline, I didn't even add them. They're native to Datastar. I didn't even know they were there, but they're there and they work. Like all these kinds of things. I'll take any comer in the space. The problem is that, at least from what I've seen, is that none of the big guys are going to have this competition or something like that because if they win, like they look like they're beating up on some small little JS framework, and if they lose, they look really bad, right? So, but if you have an app that you're like, this is the ideal React app for and again, if it's a completely offline dice roller, I don't think that's a real fair like that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about like real applications, right? And if you had a real application and we didn't have to deal with the database stuff because that's adding layers, but if you have an application that you say, look, take your best stab at it, what would it look like? You say it's cheating. I say that's just being smart with your time when it comes to like building things in Go and stuff. Like I used to be a TypeScript developer. I used Node back in the day, like a lot. And then I learned Go and it was like 14 times faster and then like 100 times more less memory to do the same kind of things. So like I just use like using the right tool. I'm not a Go. I mean, I'm a pretty heavy C guy, but Go is like the right amount of closures and Go routines. Like to me, it's like scripting and it's as close to C as scripting as I can get. So I'll take it.
Yeah,
So I'm happy to take if you think that there's a application that you're saying Daystar is worse or it's bigger or it's more complicated, I will take that on anytime you want.
yeah. I think it's probably easy to find an example of like something that like kind of like beats it on like on one kind of like axis, right? It's like, well, if I want to have that like that HX boost, like just like SPA navigation, right? I can just like do it in one tag in HTMX, right? Like, well, how? Okay, cool. I
So if you
won.
don't care about URLs or history and
No, no.
you
I
break
just mean like you could find like an example of things that will for everything that kind of like Datastar stands for is like, hey, we are the smallest one possible. Okay, I can write counter like in smaller bytes. Well, but
sure.
like you use just like raw like JavaScript instead
Right.
of like a library, right? And it's like, well, but like I bid it, right? So it's like you could take apart kind of like every one of them, and
Sure.
especially if you go to stuff like, well, I'm using like TRPC. How is Datastar going to help me use TRPC, right? And I'm like, well, it's not going to help, right? It's
Right.
it's it's it's, it's just like a different kind of like thing and different set of requirements. And if you would create like a similar app, right, you could go kind of like two ways. You could do the smaller version of that app that is like, well, they are doing animation here, but like we're not doing it, right? Like, so you can create like a almost the same app, like much kind of like simpler and much easier, right? But like I can also create like a smaller version of that app in like in Svelte, for example, right? And like that could be kind of like that would be competing. But in my thing, I'm using React Server components and like server actions and like Zod validation, all that stuff. And it's like, but like I'm in Go, I don't have Zod, right? So you could
I mean, you
find,
do, but it's yeah, like there's different ways of doing that. There's
well, it's not going to be literally Zod. I'm just
no, yeah,
saying
you're right, right.
you
There,
could find a way. You could find a way to kind of like to compete with this, and like every senior developer can create a benchmark to justify the rewrite they're going to do. Right?
yeah,
It's like
100%.
like
No, and I think it's really hard because it's very easy to get into the code golf thing. Even that Theo thing, I had to work really hard to go. I would not do it the way he did it, and I can like get rid of like these files, and I can do this and do that. Like if I want to play that game, I can make it like almost half the size of what I made it, right? And it's still the smallest one, but I'm like, okay, I'm trying to keep the vibe of it going. I guess the way I look at it is if you're looking at HTMX and if you're looking at hypermedia as the way you want to move forward and keeping state in the back end primarily, right? Datastar is the right answer. It just is. And there's no other framework that does that and allows you to write as little code. You can take any HTMX app, even ones that don't use Alpine or any front end client stuff, like just any HTMX app, and I can make it in less code in Datastar with less on the wire and less code in your templates and everything else. We just use less tags in general. So I'm happy to take that on. And the thing is that we can also do things that HTMX can't do. Like even though it's such a simple example, the stupid progress bar on the one example that they have in the progress bar where they have to pull every time to grab the new one. That is so much more code, so much more stuff over the wire. It gives hypermedia, in my opinion, a bad name because you aren't doing actual update of the rest. Your URL did not change. The state of the URL changed, but your URL did not change. So you're doing all these polls and you're not getting any different state. Like you want the current state to be the URL. So you're updating the current state of that URL. So I keep saying that Datastar is the most hypermedia focused framework there is. Like it's more hypermedia focused than so. For example, if you have HX, like you have HX get, and then you have HX select and HX target. All these things are about what you're changing, not or how you change it, not what you're changing. So now all of a sudden you get all these tags that have nothing to do with your actual hypermedia in your DOM. They have to do with how to make it happen. Whereas with the SSE approach, all that's happening in the back end, and what you see on the page is much cleaner. So I
but
think
it's also less declarative in a sense, right? I can look at the button and I can see how it all works without going to like a separate file for SSE.
when it comes to, I mean, in Datastar, or are you saying in?
Do you know Stimulus? That's like a Rails kind of like a
Yeah, I looked at the thing. Is just so Rails heavy. I just my eyes like started bleeding. I
yeah.
couldn't.
The thing that I'm bringing up is that like they will have stuff like this button is like a output or like outlet. I don't remember how to call it, but
Mhm.
like this is an output for like this component, but it's also triggers this event for this component. So like they will have like 10 tags on like one
Yeah,
button, right? But like why are they doing this? So that like in the kind of like in JavaScript they can write as little as possible, right? Because
right,
it's inside of a Ruby template, it feels kind of like right for them,
right.
but your stuff is inside like SSE, kind of like
It's in
handler,
your
right?
server, in your actual backend. It's in the backend where it should be. Like because the reason why is if you put stuff like target and select and all that in your template, that's going down to the front end. That cannot change until you do a poll or something else going on. Like that is what's going on. That is your backend state has leaked into your front end, and that leak is wrong. That's where my whole thing is like they're leaking state that should live in the backend because the backend decides when back pressure happens, when to do updates, when to do these things, and by leaking it, you're giving up the ghost of hypermedia, in my opinion.
Or I would say like like a bit of a control of like, well, I want this button to pull like every second, the first 5 seconds, but then like pull every like 2 seconds, right? Like now I have to replace the button,
Yep. Well,
right?
and that's the thing is that it just starts leaking everywhere, and now it gets more complicated, and now it feels like you're going back to being in a spa or something else. Like it just feels like there's a million. In fact, there was a talk, the Utah JS talk where I did mine. Alex was giving a talk as well about the 100-year thing. My thing is his. I disagree with Alex on a lot of things. I like the guy, but I just disagree. If you looked he had like a million endpoints, and it basically looked like a fragment RPC. It just looked like a fragment RPC. That's like a million different endpoints for every little bit and piece. Whereas my way of doing it is these like nice big chunks that automatically morph and do all those things. So it feels like a VDOM thing from the back end of it. Like you just send these big chunks and it handles it, but it's so much faster than a VDOM. It doesn't do all that work. The flame graphs are like orders of magnitude smaller than what a VDOM does, but it as all the benefits that people wanted to get out of React, I can do in any language,
Right.
and that's
Well,
beautiful to me.
the other kind of like, if you go further, right, you can get into live view where it stores the state of the application in the server. So it only sends like it does the morph part on the server, so it
Yeah,
can
and
only
well,
send.
and that's the part that I think, because I started there. I literally was like, hey, this is like there's a version of live view in Go. And I didn't. They were doing stuff with text, and I did a protobuf version of it, so it was like a more terse version of what they were doing. And the problem is that you have first of all, you have to have two-way binding, so you have to have WebSockets, which there's a huge. I have done a lot with WebSockets. I like don't use them unless you absolutely have to, because you have to have it always connected thing. But also, it is not about sending the client state down to the server and then client state up to the server. It is trying to keep two things that are disagreeing about state in sync. It is a syncing tool. It's basically CRDTs. That's what live view is. It's a CRDT fight that's constantly happening, and that is not at all. That's why when you said like it's like live view, I was like, oh, we got fighting words, because like it's just wrong. Like I think on the surface it seems like it would be the easiest thing, but it's just CRDTs and it's just wrong. Whereas
Well,
it's if you
I
say
think they're coming from like Erlang Elixir, where you can just like talk to another node as easy as you can talk to like to
yeah,
the
but the
function.
browser is not another node in your
And
Beam
yeah,
VM.
and exactly. So they're like, if you hear like any talks or whatever, like they are talking about like kind of like browser as like a distributed kind of like system, right? So like
But it's not.
I have a server, I have like a cluster of servers. Like to this cluster, there's like a hundreds of connections from like real browsers, and like I'm looking at all of this thing as like a one system that can message pass and all that stuff, right? Like, and there are applications that can like benefit from that and all that stuff. Again, given that example of the counter, right? If I have two tabs where the counter is open, I click like in one, it shows one. I click in the other one, it shows two, right? Like, and that older one doesn't get the two
Right.
update, right? So like,
Whereas Datastar, you can take the front. I don't know if you've done this yet, but take the front page and put two of them next to each other, and go down to the To Do app and just play with it. And guess what? They stay in sync because it's based off of the cookie that you're using at that time. So you can literally run two versions of the To Do app. I didn't have to do anything special. That's just native because it's built with that kind of thing. They will never get out of sync. You will never be in a bad state with the Datastar way of doing
well,
that.
I'm saying about like the example that you sent. Like right now, it has, because it does just get on the load, and only like when you click on something, it does something, right? It
Mm-hmm.
only implements those
So
two.
okay, so this is
So
one
it
of
will
those.
get out of sync.
Yeah, for sure. So the thing that I have found is that my way of doing things, like if you go to the Datastar front page right now, there's a to do app at the bottom. If you play around with that and you open up in two tabs, you cannot get out of sync with each other, because I build an event system in the background. I work on Nats for a day job. Nats is running embedded in there. There's a key value thing that has push state and all these things going on, because once I build it once, I can scale from simple apps to huge apps. And so my thing's based off event buses and push statements, so that when the state changes, everyone that's listening in a get is automatically getting the update. So I've separated my commands from my queries. So it's CQRS, if you've ever heard that term, the command query responsibility segregation. But the point is, like, you can never get out of state with Datastar the way I write it. Like the way that guy write it, like I can take his example and maybe make it more for what you're trying to say, but I will tell you that is a backend problem. It's not a Datastar problem.
Yeah, I know. I'm just again, it goes back a bit into like could or like would, right? Like it's just like, will people even kind of like know to do that, or will they go to the simpler kind of like, just pull it every second, like who cares?
I hope that they don't. I really do. I think that comes to the documentation, but it's not a should for me. That's how I build things. Just to be clear, like it's not a you could do it. That's how I do it.
Well, you just said, right, is that like there is like a bit of disconnect with like how you kind of like, what you think and like what the kind of like the library is, right? Like
Sure.
the
Well, then there's also the disconnect between what I personally think, which is like you shouldn't be writing TypeScript in the back end, right? I don't like PHP, but like then the main contributor is a PHP guy, right? Like having the different opinions is fine. So there's my opinion, then there's the framework opinion, then there's the library opinion. The library's opinions are almost non-existent, whereas like the framework is very hypermedia focused. So I'm happy to take his example and make it the way I would do it. If you want to see that, that's fine. But yeah, that's again, that's up to teaching and getting people to think more declaratively and more push based instead of just polling. Because the way he did it is based off of the idea that you're polling and that hypermedia has to be polling based. And that's what I'm trying to push against is that hypermedia does not equal polling. It just doesn't. Just because that's the way people have done it doesn't mean that that's the way you should do it.
Yeah.
So
I would have to run soon, but kind of like the last thing that I would say is that I think why kind of like being a HTMX defender. I don't know if it fits on the screen, but it's like
hey, I have
doing
my floppy
HTMX,
around here somewhere.
HTMX hoodie, right? So like to defend HTMX, the thing that is like what it gives you when you use HTMX is like you look at it and you have like the very clear understanding. This is how I would have done it. Like I would wrote this function that listens to this attribute, and like if this happens, like so it's again it's like pretty big, right? It's like in terms of the size and all that stuff. But like you can imagine how to write like a simple version of that, kind of like just by looking at it. The joke that I did in that HTMX for people who don't care video, right, is like there is like a Wikipedia article as like from like 2005, like Ajax. What is Ajax? You write this function, and like you call this function on click, right? And that function, it has like an ID of the attribute that you want to replace, and it has a URL of the thing that you like where you get the partial. And it's like that's how everyone who did like jQuery.ajax like in 2005, right? Like that's how everyone thinks about it. That's how everyone remembers it. And it's like when they see hxget with hxtarget, they're like, oh, I understand what's going on here. I wrote this function like 20 years ago, right? And with Datastar, because it does kind of like everything. It's kind of like trickier to understand like where you would start, because it's like, do I look at it from my like React brain? Do I look from it on it like from a like jQuery brain, right? Do I look at it from my like HTMX brain? So it's like not clear where your kind of like mind can kind of like catch on. I see a lot of like a smaller libraries or like languages. They do if you go to like Gleam programming language, for example, like in their docs they have like Gleam for Erlang developers,
Right.
Gleam for Elixir developers, Gleam for like JavaScript developers, right? So like here's how you can kind of like get into that thing from like that angle. So when I look at Datastar, I'm like, well, how would I write this? Like, especially given that like the people who don't use WebSockets, right? Or they get like SSE from their framework, and like they don't see it like in case of like Remix, right? Like if you talk to people, it's like, hey, you could do this thing. Like, how does it work? Well, I don't know, but like, do you know about streaming? No. It's like it's funny
Yeah.
for React developers because like streaming in React was out for like um, 7 years. I forgot, but like it was like years we had streaming, and like no one used it until like Next.js deployed it, and they're like, we added streaming. It's like, cool, it was out there for like
Yeah.
years.
No,
Like,
it was
well,
out
what
there.
have you added, right?
I mean, you have a very valid point, and I was saying in our Discord channel earlier today that like on the number line between uh, HTMX and React, data star is an imaginary number. Like it's just out here, and it doesn't fit. In, even though it's closer to HTMX than it is React, it does all the things React does. So it is different, and I agree that that is one of the hard things to do because I built the tool that scales to like crazy problems, and now teaching it to like someone who's used to doing CRUD, like I've not been thinking about that. But I will say that's where a lot of our efforts are going to be going into documenting and to doing how-to guides and getting people on this idea that push-based semantics simplify your life and getting rid of the polling. You saw me on Twitter probably today. I was doing the like trying to get someone off polling, and like baptizing them because like it's going to be a complete mental change for someone to go, oh, I can actually do hypermedia and not do polling. Because in my head, it seems like people think that those things have to be the same thing, and they just are not. Like, so we have to get people out of that mindset.
I haven't used that, but like, doesn't HTMX has like SSE plugin as well?
Okay, so yeah, the technically it does, and it's a completely separate entity. Doesn't interact with anything else. Doesn't interact with target or select or anything. It's a completely separate piece, and it only does fragments. It doesn't handle signals or removing things or executing scripts, and it only uses a get. So you can't do posts and patch and put and all these things. It doesn't do things like if you switch tabs, it automatically can close them for you or do retries or like none of that stuff exists. Like Datastar's thing is a fully implemented solution, whereas that is just trying to use the baseline stuff that's built into the browser. That's not good enough, in my opinion. It's just not. It's kind of like, oh, you know how OOB in HTMX is a stepchild. It just like once you do that, everything feels dirty and weird. That's what like SSE is worse than that in
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, I think like it's funny how kind of like a lot of the stuff that you say kind of like rhymes with HTML, it was like Carson HTMX, right? Because it's like you're like, well, it's like the library is like small enough. Well, it does it does all the stuff that I need, right? It's just like HTMX just put there like the stuff that we care about, like marker kind of like a bit lower, right? It's like if
Well,
your
the difference
solution
is
doesn't
though
work
is
this
that
following, well, we don't care about it, right?
But the thing is that it's built from the ground up to be pluggable. So you can disagree with the framework Datastar and still use the library. You could rewrite Datastar or HTMX in Datastar today. It will be smaller than HTMX is now, guaranteed. And then you could do that and actually have a better, like more flexible thing. So that's where there's a lot of things I agree with Carson. It's the implementation, not the vibes. His vibes I get. Like I get what he's doing. The problem is it's implemented in a way that you can't just you can tack things on with the extensions, but you can't get rid of anything. Like it's not built at all like Datastar. So my issue is with the implementation, not with the ideas.
Right. Okay, I have like way more questions
Well,
about
yeah, we can
this
do this
topic.
again too. Like I want you to like hopefully this has cleared up a little bit, at least a bit more the mentality and like I am telling you it can be used for all the things that you're saying it can't be used for. And I'm happy to prove it to you with code. You just have to give me an example that you think is a fair, like fair to everybody, right? Like you don't want to just make it like, well, yeah, I'm doing a like links and forms on a page. I'll be like, cool, I'll do that too. Like I don't need, I would build that as two separate apps personally. So
Well, I'm not like a big player into like kind of like pitting things together. I like the most I do is around like the bundle sizes for like Hello World, and because it's like, oh, that's just like interesting, right? Like how
sure.
what's the baseline? Is like kind of like how crazy is it to like to have the page that has like Preact, Svelte, and Solid on the same page, right? Like, is that kind of like too much, or
I
like
mean,
it feels twice as small as like React?
so I will say that if you're just doing like the basic, like if you're just trying to merge fragments and just do like just basic signals and merge fragments, that's basically it, right? Like basically the equivalent of what you can do in HTMX. I think that's around 8K roughly compared to the 18K that HTMX is. So, like there's value in that as is right now. So I don't know if I would just switch over because of the size. I don't think that's a real issue. Like going from 4 milliseconds to 8 milliseconds is not an issue, like in in my terms. So that's why like I care about these things, but it's again, you're right. Like me talking about it and me marketing it are two different things in my mind, but maybe they aren't.
Yeah, I know that like the person who likes to play with that like comparison game is Ryan Florence. He's doing his like Trello dashboard, and like he has like the challenge, right? He's like the remix version is so great and so simple, no one will ever be able to
I
get
mean, if
close.
you send me a link to that thing, the thing is that I kind of did it with Theo and he didn't respond back. He said he would and he didn't. And like, if we can guarantee that he'll actually respond when I build something, I'm happy to do it. It's just a matter of like, I want there to be some actual output of that of like an admission that what someone's wrong here, right? And it's fine if it's me, but I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is. I just don't know how to get that out there.
Yeah, well, I think it was like Trellix. Before that, there was like a movies app that I think everyone can like try to replicate, which is like a bigger app, and everyone did it differently enough, so it was
Right. It's
impossible
not
to
really competing.
compare.
So is it remix run example Trellix? Is that it?
Should be something like that.
Yeah, it's Ryan Florence example Trellix.
Yeah.
It hasn't been updated in 8 months.
Well, that's when he was done with that, and no one could compete with him.
Okay, cool. Like, I'm willing to start a fight. That's fine. So, yeah, no, let's talk again. Hopefully, you do give Datastar at least a try, or at least stop saying it's like a spa and it's not live view. At least do that for me. Can I get at least that one win?
I'm going to play with it a bit more, and I will
Okay.
see if I can get it to.
At least run the full framework first before you start messing around with the bundler, please. At least.
Yeah.
That's a no. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. I know this one was a long one, but hopefully it was worthwhile. All right. Talk to you guys soon.